Hello, this is Bill Bonner. I'm going to read a little booklet to you, or you can read it yourself. It's called The Day America Dies. I think it's important. And in the next 3 short paragraphs, I'll outline why. It's like closing time in a bar. The bartender tells you, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. The U.S. can't go home. That is, it can't go back to normal. Not back to the country that you and I once knew. It's already gone too far. It owes $88 trillion. A normal interest rate, given today's inflation, is about 10%. At that rate, millions and millions of people would go broke in a matter of days. Mortgages would go unpaid. Businesses would default on their loans. And the richest, most powerful people in the country would lose 30 trillion to 50 trillion in wealth, almost overnight. They're not going to let that happen. But we can't stay where we are either. Inflation is rising and prices will keep going up as long as interest rates stay low and the government continues to spend money it doesn't have. That's just the way it works. There's no mystery to it, no magic. Inflation will rise to 10%, then to 20%, and then to 50%. And as prices rise, voters are going to get restless. There will be shortages. Gas stations will run out of gas. The supermarkets will run out of food. There will be strikes and demonstrations, and some of them will get out of control. Politics will become more chaotic and more cutthroat. And then the whole system, the USA as we've known it, will crack up completely. That's what happens. When inflation gets out of control, everything gets out of control. And then life, as we knew it, comes to an end. Something new begins, and it's not always something you want. That's what this is about. I want to explain how it happens, why it can't be avoided, and what you can do to protect yourself. So let me begin. And I'll start with a quotation. For the first time, this generation is going to go into a store and not be able to get what they want. That's from BlackRock President Rob Capito. Chapter 1, How It Began. The father of the U.S. Constitution must have felt the weight on his shoulders in the summer of 1787. James Madison was on his way to the Constitutional Convention for the United States of America. In Philadelphia, he and his friends, and some enemies too, were going to fashion a new government. It was to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But Madison was no fool. He was well schooled in Greek and Roman history. He had spent the better part of the previous year studying a trunk full of ancient text in Latin, Greek, and French, sent to him by his friend Thomas Jefferson, then in Paris. He was trying to figure out how to keep the new nation from going off the rails. Madison knew that a free country was easy to set up, but it was hard to keep up. He knew that the people were easily swayed by the press and easily misled by demagogues. Over time, governments always tend to become more powerful and more corrupt. The powerful get rich, the rich get powerful. And soon they form a more or less permanent ruling class whose interests are very different from the people they were meant to serve. James Madison knew that it would take a carefully drafted system of checks and balances and a Bill of Rights specifically limiting what the government can do to keep the nation on track. But that was a long, long time ago, and a lot of water has passed under that bridge. So here's my warning to you. Nations and empires collapse like bridges, little by little, and then all of a sudden. It's just the second law of thermodynamics at work. All complex systems eventually fall apart. And we are now facing the beginning of the end for the nation set up by James Madison and his band of constitutional innovators. But let's try to remember what it was like 30, 40, 50 years ago. It was different back then. You could say pretty much whatever you wanted. People would disagree with you, but they wouldn't try to shut you down or cancel you. Today, if you say you like the country the way it was 50 years ago, some people would say you're a white supremacist. But back then, Republicans and Democrats in Congress, for example, actually liked each other. They respected each other, and they agreed on a set of core principles to guide the nation. Back then, we didn't have such a big gap between liberals and conservatives as we do today. Do you remember that? And we didn't have such a big, wide divide between the rich and the poor either. Up until the 1980s, rich and poor people got richer more or less at the same rate. We all read the same newspapers and shopped in the same grocery stores. Teenagers bagged our groceries and pumped our gas. That's how they learned to work. We then took the paper bags from the grocery store and used them to cover our school books. But then things began to change. The rich got richer than ever, while the middle classes lagged behind. In 1970, for example, a corporate CEO earned 18 times as much as the average employee. By 2020, it was 351 times. Back then, too, we only had 3 major channels on a TV screen, but at least we were all on the same page. Today, different groups have different facts blasted to them on a screen the size of a barn wall, and they each have a whole different way of looking at things. And instead of letting people have their say, some people want to block themselves from anything they don't agree with, labeling alternative opinions as misinformation. And remember when the new model cars came out? It was exciting to see them, shiny with new gadgets and features. Remember the push-button transmission on the Dodge Dart? These new cars represented a faith in the future, technological progress and prosperity. Consumers chose the innovations they wanted and dropped, like the Ford Edsel, the ones they didn't. And if you wanted a bank account, you'd just walk in, open an account in minutes, talking to a live person, and you'd walk out with a free toaster oven. But I'm not writing just to reminisce. I'm writing to tell you that that life is over. It's gone. It's finished. So is Madison's fine republic. Today, the government wants to tell us which kinds of car to buy, with tax credits for some and penalties for others. California Governor Gavin Newsom even says he will ban gasoline-powered autos and lawnmowers by 2035. Now, who wants to invest in a new innovation now without getting approval from the government? And the government has practically taken over banking too. You need to show your birth certificate almost to open an account. They act like they don't want your money, and then they pay you less than 1% interest. Yes, things have changed, and there's no going back. All we can do is prepare for what comes next. And I fear the next thing will be the kind of nightmare that Madison worried about. The process is already well underway. Just over the last 20 years, things have changed. Congress no longer represents the people. Our presidents are second-rate or worse. Our military hasn't actually won a war in 77 years, but each year it gets more money anyway. And the federal government debt alone has exploded from just $237 billion in 1945 to $30 trillion today. And now our debt, public and private, is so great it can't be paid down. That's that $88 trillion I mentioned earlier. It gets bigger every year, and it's what will cause this nightmare I'm going to describe to you. But it's not just a matter of money, and it's not just a matter of government either. While the government has become incompetent and dysfunctional, so have our private institutions. The media, for example, it no longer gives us both sides of the story so we can make up our own minds. Now it tells us what we should think and it suppresses any contrary point of view. And our universities train a whole generation to believe that our ancestors were a bunch of white supremacists and that the nation itself is so tainted by racism it doesn't deserve to survive. But don't worry, it won't be long now before these activists get their wish, because Wall Street and the economy are completely hooked on the Federal Reserve's ultra-cheap money. Take it away, and the stock and bond markets will collapse like a house of cards, and the economy will go into a deep depression. Let's face it, the U.S. that you and I once knew is already gone. All that's left is the husk of a great nation, and that too will soon be history. In fact, I can tell you almost exactly when America will die. Of course, I'm not talking about the country. There will still be a USA, but it won't bear much resemblance to the Madison's Republic. Chapter 2. The Good Old Days. I'm not complaining. I was lucky to grow up when America was, by almost any measure, #1, top of the heap. Our Hollywood movies were seen all over the world. No other film industry came close. Our music, art, culture were widely admired and copied. Our automobiles lost market share to Europe and Japan in the 1980s and 1990s, but they were still among the best in the world. Our army, of course, was second to none, and our government had its faults, but among major nations it still had the oldest functioning democracy. And where else could you drive coast to coast, from the east to the west, for only $28 worth of gasoline? I did it in 1974. I drove from Virginia across the Great Plains and the western deserts, and then I came upon what must have been the most fascinating and dynamic place, I mean the coolest and weirdest place on earth, California. Back then, people all over the world were California dreaming, and they were wishing they could all be California girls. In 1999, the U.S. reached some kind of peak. The federal government was still in surplus, counting Social Security. It was more or less at peace with the world. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was clear sailing for the U.S. It was the end of history, wrote Francis Fukuyama. Nothing better could possibly come along. But then something went wrong. Nothing better came along. Instead, along came something much worse. You see, Madison's Republic had a fatal flaw. Of course, Madison knew what he was up against. Oh yes, he had done his homework. In the court of Louis XVI of France, for example, civilization reached some kind of apogee. At least that's what people believe. Manners, food, theater, decorative arts, all reached a zenith of some sort. But the rise of civilization hid problems. The aristocracy had set themselves apart. They had exempted themselves from taxation. This left the rest of the population, those who were the least able, to bear the whole burden of supporting government. The aristocrats had also angled for special privileges, such as being able to collect tolls for crossing their land. They could levy a tax on people who lived on their land and charge for using mills, ovens, and wine presses. Many of the peasants were sharecroppers, and they were barely making ends meet. And they were often forced to work on roads and canals with little or no compensation. And so with so many nobles, each with so many rights to collect fees, taxes, tariffs, and the like, it's not surprising that commerce was slow and expensive. A wagon load of merchandise, for example, traveling from Bordeaux to Paris might have to pass through dozens of toll booths and duty collection stations. And you should have seen how the aristocracy ate. Now, Ripley's.com reports, and I quote, "A typical meal for Louis XIV consisted of a whopping 20 to 30 dishes. The first course was hors d'oeuvres such as peasant, shellfish, soup, and pâté, Fruit was served in the shape of a large pyramid. Other dishes included roast and pies and chicken, turkey, duck, boar, venison, and beef. Now imagine how the peasants must have felt. They were on the verge of starvation. Or let's look at a very different case, the Soviet Union. While the French aristocracy were plainly and openly in it for themselves, the Communist Party claimed to be acting on behalf of the proletariat, the workers. But the party soon began to act like an aristocracy of its own. Party members, the nomenklatura, got better jobs, better houses, summer dachas, their own cars with chauffeurs. Very few private citizens could own a car. They even got to shop at different stores to get better things. With party membership, you could enter stores that were off limits to the general population and buy imported and luxury goods unknown to the public. Michael Voslensky in the 1980s tried to calculate the value of these special privileges. He found that there may have been more difference between the Soviet elite and the general public than there was between American CEOs and average employees. Do you see what I'm getting at? No matter what you call your government, there are always some few, an elite who get control of it. Over time, they use it to accumulate more and more power, and then the power corrupts them. And yes, America has its own aristocracy too, its own nomenklatura. And it's what Madison was trying to prevent. For a long time, he succeeded. But that was then, and this is now. And maybe you've already noticed the difference between the way things used to be and the way we find them today. In fact, I think we might be past the point of no return, past the beginning of the end. Around about the end of 1999, that's when things really started to go downhill. That's when the U.S. government began spending money like there was no tomorrow. $8 trillion on a war on terror, another $8 trillion or so bailing out Wall Street, followed by yet another $4 trillion in printing press money in the COVID panic of 2021. In addition to the direct spending, the ultra-low interest rates were used to rescue Wall Street. These excessively low rates led to an explosion of borrowing, and now we have $88 trillion in public and private debt, and an economy that depends on more ultra-low interest rates just to survive. When you owe money, you have to pay interest on your debt. When you owe a little, you pay a little interest, but when you owe a lot, you pay a lot of interest, and it will kill you. And I know, I don't have to tell you, but those super low interest rates and all that printing press money used to sustain them is what gave us today's inflation. And it's not going away for one very simple reason. The elite who control the system, the aristocracy, don't want it to go away. They were the major beneficiaries of all this debt. It paid for their pet projects. It's what pushed up their stock and bond prices. They don't want it to end. Of course, the government and the mainstream media point their fingers at the supply chain disruptions, or at the COVID-19, or at the Russians, but the Russians didn't print $8 trillion since 1999. The U.S. Fed did, and now prices are soaring. Gasoline up 124% in the last 2 years. Wheat up 50% in the last few months. Houses up 37% since the beginning of 2019. Food, transportation, housing, those are your major expenses. And together they're going up at an official rate of 8.5%. The real rate is probably twice as high. But what really happened? Did inflation really get out of control? Or is it just part of the plan? Is inflation being used to help the American elite get more of what it wants? After all, it's one of the oldest tricks in the book. When a country runs out of money, it prints more. Then prices rise. People pay an inflation tax and don't know whom to blame. You don't have to read a trunk full of old books to see what's going on. Just remember what happened in France and in Russia. Prices rose and people revolted. And look at what's going on today in Venezuela, Argentina, Egypt, Turkey. And just look at the crisis building in Europe and right now at home too. It doesn't take too much imagination to see those same things developing in our own backyard. Chapter 3, It Won't Be Pretty. Just picture the scene. Sometime, maybe 2 years from now, maybe 10, you'll drive into a gas station, you'll detour around a group of protesters, looters, burning tires in the middle of the road. You don't want to get stopped by them. They might pull you out of the car and beat you to death right in the street. By then, we'll be in the middle of a nightmare. America may have become a very tough place, mean, chaotic, difficult. When you finally get to the pumps, you may want to murder someone too. At $45 a gallon, you'll barely be able to afford enough gas to get back and forth to work. But maybe you won't have to go to work. Maybe your company will close its doors. You see, America's leaders have gotten themselves into a trap. It's an old trap. It's well known, well signposted. And once in it, you either need extraordinary courage and foresight to get out of it, or things get a lot worse. And here's the sad situation. I don't believe that the President, Congress, or the Fed, any of them have the backbone or the brains to set things right. What's more, I don't think they want to. Here's why. As inflation increases, interest rates increase too. Normally, mortgage rates are 2% to 3% above the inflation rate. With inflation over 8% today, that would give us 10% mortgage rates, not 5% that people pay today. Now let me ask you a question. How many people do you know who could afford to refinance their homes at 10%? How many businesses could roll over their debt at 10%? How could the U.S. government cover its trillion-dollar deficits at 10% interest? They couldn't. Here's what will happen. As interest rates rise, the Feds will be faced with widespread defaults, banking failures, spending cutbacks, bankruptcies, unemployment, and jingle mail. Remember that? In the mortgage crisis of 2008-2009, homeowners put their keys in the mail slot and just walked away from their homes. More importantly, the Feds will be faced with a major crash on Wall Street. The richest, most powerful people in America, they're the ones who own the stocks and bonds, will be losing trillions of dollars. What will the Fed do? Instead of putting on the brakes like Paul Volcker did in 1980, it will decide to protect the status quo. It will protect the wealth and power of the American aristocracy, the rich, the powerful, the nomenclatura, rather than the prosperity and stability of the nation. And so what's coming is more money printing and higher prices, much higher prices. And higher prices don't just annoy grocery shoppers, they ricochet through the economy like a runaway oil truck. Look, almost everything we eat, work with, dress in, or live in, it must be transported. And with small exceptions, almost all the world's transportation runs on diesel fuel. Raise the price of diesel fuel and everything else goes up too, or it stops coming. That's when the going really gets tough. But wait, I'm not going to try to convince you of anything. In this short booklet, I've laid out what I see as the evidence and the arguments that are most important. I'll let you make up your mind about them. And then you'll have some questions to ask yourself. How will you protect yourself? What happens to your savings, your retirement? Will you be safe? Chapter 4, a fuller introduction. I'm sorry to wait so long before making a fuller introduction, but I just wanted to show you what was at stake. I'm Bill Bonner. I'm not running for office. I'm not selling investments. I have no reputation to protect. I'm just an observer. And all I have to offer you is words. Words that tell you what I see. And here, I'm just giving you words. You listen for free, and you judge for yourself what they're worth. A little background. I teamed up with Mark Hulbert more than 40 years ago. We started a newsletter that rated the performance of investment newsletters. We wanted to answer a simple question. Could a single guru really beat the market? And if so, which one should you follow? This led to 4 decades of curiosity. Why were some investors so successful and others were not? How did the markets really work? How did the economy work? Out of this research grew an entire group of investment services operating in the United States and a dozen other countries all over the world. And by 2018, we had more than $1 billion in revenue and more paid subscribers than the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times put together. Of course, I'm very proud of this group. Over the last 40 years, our maverick newsletters have hit upon some of the biggest profit opportunities to come down the pike. They're too numerous to name, but here are just a few of the more famous examples. The emergence of China and the Asian tigers in the late 1990s. The dawn of the internet and biotech ages in the early 2000s. The beginning of the commodities and gold bull markets in 2002, the peak of the housing bubble and the great crash of 2008, the birth of an obscure new kind of money, cryptocurrency, the decriminalization and legalization of marijuana and other drugs. Our readers, thousands of them, made fortunes from these trends, investing in Microsoft, gold, Amazon, Bitcoin, Tesla, and many, many more. But let me be clear, these weren't all my insights. They come from dozens of our researchers and analysts. Heck, I was even wrong about a lot of these things. But what they have in common is that these gurus were all looking for profits, for the upside. Since 1980, that was the thing to do, look for the profits. And there were plenty of profit opportunities. Our mission was to find them before they went mainstream. But now, I'm looking at an entirely different situation and a new mission. After a whole generation of upside, suddenly we're facing something new, downside, and a lot of it. Instead of looking for individual specific ways to make money, it's time to pay attention to the big picture. And you're not going to like what you see. That's why I'm focusing this last part of my career on one single objective: to get through this next crisis with our wealth and our wits intact. I've handpicked a small group of colleagues to work with me, and we quietly began our work less than 6 months ago. I'm going to show you more in this booklet, and I'll give you specific ideas on what you should do to prepare for the coming crisis. We've carefully laid out these ideas in a series of research reports I'd like to tell you about. But you may be wondering, why am I doing this now? Why not last year or next year? Well, because today the crisis that's been developing for the last 22 years is coming to a head. And now, in comparison, nothing else matters very much. Chapter 5, Time to Move On. Over the last 40 years, investors have made a lot of money. The Dow rose 36 times, and along came dot-coms, Amazon, Google, Apple, cryptos, pot stocks, NFTs, SPACs. There was upside almost everywhere you looked. Yes, there were losses too. There were dead ends and crashes. But the general trend was up. And there was no doubt why. Prices were being pushed up by free-flowing credit. During that time, debt rose 1,500%. The newsletter industry, of which I was part, was particularly good at ferreting out these opportunities. Investors wanted good investments. Our researchers and writers found them. But today, all that extra debt is catching up to us. Yes, there's a storm of debt destruction that's going to blow through the markets and the economy, and you can be flattened by it. Or you might be able to use it to make the kind of life-changing gains that you've been looking for. Look, there are two sides to every trade, so this is not all gloom and doom. Even in the midst of major financial disasters, there are always some people who do okay. In this message, for example, I'll tell you about the simple trade that could have turned $100 into $33 million in the last century. I know it sounds unbelievable, but the numbers don't lie. It really does work. Of course, you're not going to live long enough to turn $100 into $33 million, but that's not the point. This system gives you a vital bit of information that you can use anytime. It tells you when to invest in the stock market and when to take cover. Most importantly, it helps us understand what is really going on. And what it's telling us right now couldn't be clearer. It may be the single most important idea I show you in this booklet. In fact, if all you take away from this is understanding how this trade works and what to do with it, the time you spend listening to me today may be the most profitable few minutes of your life. Here's the thing. I'm no investment genius. I'm no guru. I'm just lucky. Almost my entire life has been spent on the upside. I was born after World War II. I grew up during the glory years of the 50s and 60s. I went to college on a Navy scholarship, and I got into the financial industry at the beginning of the biggest boom in history. All you had to do was buy stocks in 1980 after Paul Volcker said he would tame inflation and sit tight. Yes, there were some thrills and spills along the way, but almost everything went up. That's the secret for me and for you. Not being smart, just being in the right place at the right time. Most of the time, it's just luck. But sometimes, if you work hard enough, you can figure it out. I've been connecting the dots almost every day now for almost a quarter of a century. And what I've noticed is that things that seem unconnected or mere acts of God often seem crazy, in fact, but they're not really crazy. You just follow the money. Chapter 6, the big shock coming your way. Sometime in the future, maybe in 2033, 2028, or even 2023, you're going to be in for a surprise, an unpleasant surprise. You'll go into a grocery store. You'll find a gallon of milk priced at $49. Bacon won't be $10 a pound, it'll be $100 a pound, and your favorite breakfast cereal won't be there at all. But it's more than just $90 for a pound of beef or a $1,000 monthly electric bill. It gets worse, much worse. People will complain about inflation, but inflation is just the visible part. The real problem is deeper and harder to root out. Especially upsetting will be the price of gasoline. It will be over $50 a gallon. Heating fuel won't be far behind. Prices for everything will be rising fast. I'm not talking about inflation alone. That would be bad enough. I'm talking about something much more than that. Something much worse. Social and political chaos. And the corruption of our elite institutions, the universities, Congress, and the press, and all that goes with it. Just sticking with the money, this inflation will be intentional. For the elite, it's the only way to wipe out trillions of dollars worth of debt. But once underway, it will be impossible to control. It will wipe out trillions in debt, bond, insurance, and retirement values too. It will trigger a stock market crash that erases at least $30 trillion in assets. Those financial losses will be staggering, and they will disrupt the entire financial and economic system. Businesses will stop operating. Millions of people will lose their jobs. Then there will be severe shortages of fuel, food, building materials, silicon chips, and component parts. And then come the riots and the fight for control of government. We've had foretaste of all these things already. If it were calculated today the way it was in 1980, producer prices would already be going up about 20% per year. Gasoline prices have almost doubled nationally since 2020. Rents are rising at a 40% rate in some areas. And we've seen what happens when supplies run short. Recently in Ben Salem, Pennsylvania, what was described as a 40-person brawl broke out at a Golden Corral restaurant, apparently because the kitchen ran low on steak. Imagine what will happen when the hamburger disappears, and milk, and gasoline, and heating fuel. And what happens when the stimmy checks are nearly worthless, and the welfare and unemployment checks too. Imagine how you will feel when you go to the store with a pocket full of $100 bills and you still don't have enough to buy a box of cereal. This gets me back to the point I was making at the beginning of this report. The government is trapped. It spent too much, it promised too much, and now the only way it can make good on its promises is to print more money. And it's not just the government. Business and household debt is at record levels too. Stocks and bonds are extremely overpriced. This is a very dangerous situation. Interest rates are headed up. As they go up, all of those asset prices, including houses, go down. And it happens little by little, and then all of a sudden. If interest rates simply return to normal levels, it would mean losses of at least $50 trillion in stock, bonds, and real estate. That's why only one outcome is possible, and it's the worst one. The federal government has to inflate intentionally. The government can't stop printing money because the government itself depends on it. Wall Street depends on it. The universities, the press, the military, the bureaucracy, almost the entire community of the great and the good, the elite influencers, the economists, lobbyists, columnists, the richest people in our society, our own aristocracy, the American nomenclatura, owe much more than they can pay. And they depend on the Fed's ultra-low interest rates and their money printing to stay in business. You see, America has its oligarchs too, people who've used their political connections to make money. None of these people want to go back to normal. They all depend on ultra-low interest rates to maintain their fortunes, and they'll do everything they can to keep normal from coming back. But there's a problem. Here it is in a nutshell. The only way to keep interest rates low is to make more credit available, and more credit means more dollars, but more dollars means more inflation, and more inflation means the dollar will be less valuable. Today, there are 7.8 billion people on this planet. Whether they know it or not, they depend on the value of the dollar. It's the world's reserve currency. It's the most circulated currency on the planet. It's what they use to buy steel and coal and oil and wheat and almost all the other critical things they depend on. What happens when they can no longer trust the dollar? When they refuse to take it? Nobody knows. But it might be a lot more severe than running out of steak at a buffet restaurant. People who make large investments, say in oil refineries, generators, or factories, depend on the value of the dollar. When they begin to mistrust the dollar, we have a big problem. Already, thanks to inflation, new investments in old industries have fallen off dramatically. And that means less steel, less oil, less of everything that the economy depends on. Now here's Jeff Curry. He's the Goldman Sachs Group researcher, and he says he's never seen commodity markets pricing in shortages the way they are now. I've been doing this for 30 years and I've never seen anything like this. This is a molecule crisis. We're out of everything. I don't care if it's oil, gas, coal, copper, aluminum, you name it, we're out of it. Oil wells are capped, generators decommissioned, storage tanks abandoned, new investment has dropped in half. New discoveries of oil have fallen to a 73-year low. We can live without new cars, but can we live without heating fuel? It sounds pretty scary, doesn't it? And it's going to be pretty grim for most people, but not for everyone. The rich, for example, the elite, the aristocracy, don't worry about them. They'll be able to afford gasoline at $50 a gallon. And it doesn't have to be too bad for you either, if you know what to do. I'll spell it out more clearly later. It's the subject of one of our major research reports that I want to send you. I'll tell you about it later, but for now, let's just say this, that at $50 a gallon for gasoline, it's not so bad if you own the gas company. Yes, you've got to be in the right place at the right time. And right now, the government is setting up a ripoff, punishing at least 90% of the population and rewarding just a few. You need to be sure you're on the right side of that trade. Chapter 7, not just a matter of money. I'm just adding 2 plus 2, and here's what I get. Someday in the future, perhaps on a particularly cold night, with prices rising at 50% per year or more, America's entire economy will collapse. ATMs will run out of cash, credit cards won't work, fuel won't get delivered, blackouts will cover much of the country, pipes will freeze, food in the freezer will go bad, you may shiver in the dark praying for a little power for weeks. And you'll be one of the lucky ones. Others, poorer, older people with less of a margin of error, may die. Experts tell us that if the economy were to shut down, it would take only 2 days before the supermarket shelves were bare. And what would happen to elderly people with no heat in their houses and no food in their refrigerators? COVID could look like a cakewalk compared to what lies ahead. In the 48 hours following an energy cutoff, almost all businesses would run out of supplies and shut down. If the shutoff continued, in 4 to 8 weeks, civilization as we know it would come to a halt. Almost everywhere would start to look like the brawl in the Golden Corral Steakhouse. Everything moves by truck, and almost every truck runs on diesel fuel. When the diesel fuel stops coming, the trucks stop rolling. The goods stop arriving, food, medicine, building materials, everything. And when that happens, it gets pretty ugly. Imagine, in the midst of a brutal Arctic cold, the grid won't be able to light up the way it used to. Energy companies have already lowered output. They see the government tilting the table against them, trying to force them to go green. And inflation is making it hard for them to do that and making it hard for them to earn money or even make a reasonable forecast. All they know for sure is that they're trading a valuable product, oil, gas, uranium, whatever it is, for fast depreciating dollars. And what happens when inflation gets worse? They will do what they already do in Venezuela or Argentina. They leave the oil in the ground, and the pipelines and the generators are unbuilt. And then, in a long spell of darkness and cold, the remaining power plants won't be able to handle the load. Some areas will get power, others won't. Thousands, maybe millions of people will suffer. This risk is so great that it was the subject of one of our first private briefings. I arranged it for subscribers in the late December 2021. It was called The Winter Catastrophe, and a transcript is available to you if you want it. I'll send it to you. You'll hear from real energy experts, not political hacks. Chapter 8, my fourth and final warning. But let me back up. I'm not running for office. I'm not an activist. I'm not trying to influence U.S. policy or improve the world. I'm just trying to connect the dots. And what I see now could be the worst crisis ever to hit the U.S. A combination of incompetence, out of control inflation, a stock market crash, a wipeout in the bond market, underinvestment in the industries that we depend on, along with a horrendous power outage, followed by riots and revolution. Yes, it's not about money. It's much, much worse. It will be the last gasp for the America that we knew as children. And it's not just because of a series of mistakes. There's more to it. America's elite, the whole elite, Republican as well as Democrat, the people who control the government, the Fed, the media, Wall Street, and the universities have become corrupt and incompetent. That's why you won't expect to hear this in the New York Times or the Washington Post. They're in on it. But I'll come back to that. I've given out only 3 major warnings during my half-century career. This is my 4th, and I believe it's the most important. I warned investors of the stock crash in Japan in 1989. That market collapsed in 1990 with an 80% loss, and it has never recovered. In the late 90s, I warned investors that the dot-coms would crash in the US too. Again, I was right on the mark. The NASDAQ dropped in March 2000 and fell 85%. It took 15 years for it to recover. My 3rd warning came in 2005-2007 when the mortgage finance real estate bubble was ready to explode. That crash began in 2007 and continued into 2009 with a 50% drop in the stock market and 4 million people who lost their homes. This is my 4th, and this time it's not a crash narrowly focused on Japanese stocks or Wall Street. It's a system-wide collapse that will affect everyone because we all have to eat. Farm tractors run on diesel fuel too. And at $50 a gallon, it will cost $25,000 just to fill up a standard 500-gallon farm fuel tank. While all prices are up almost 9%, prices that farmers pay for fertilizer, seeds, chemicals, and so forth are going up 3 times as fast. And shortages are already appearing, especially of fertilizer. Billions of people are alive today only because we're able to use natural gas to make ammonia by heating up nitrogen and hydrogen. This fertilizer increased corn production by a factor of 5, which allowed the human population to increase also about 5 times. So imagine that you're a farmer. The average farmer in the U.S. is about 60 years old. You're getting tired, and you can't hire anyone to help you. Fertilizer and pesticide prices are spiking up, if you can get them all. How would you feel about paying $50 a gallon for diesel fuel? You may be thinking that this is a good time to retire. And then, who grows the corn? Who produces the wheat? The fields grow up in weeds, not wheat. And what about the truckers, the processors, the packagers, the distributors, the retailers? They too need fuel and supplies. And what if they're too expensive or not available when you need them? You saw what the COVID shutdowns did for the economy. Now try to imagine what 50% inflation will do, and big supply chain disruptions in basic industries. What farmer, what producer, what businessman wants to put his seed in the ground when he has no idea what price he might get for the crop? Inflation makes a hash of business calculations. And then you, a consumer, you go to the store, you find a box of Wheaties for $15, but the store is out of milk. And the canned goods are hit or miss. Half of the shelves are empty. Oh, you'll probably still be able to get something to eat, but it might not be what you want, and it might be very, very expensive. Chapter 9, Locked Down in Argentina. I have a small ranch and a vineyard in Argentina. You might call it my own personal bolt hole, the place where I go to get away from it all. The mountains and the high desert make it a perfect place to get away from the crazy financial world and do real work. I've always loved building things and working with my hands. It keeps me busy, and it's more satisfying than writing articles about interest rates and stock market. And here I am, here's a picture of me. I'm building a tiny chapel on the ranch. In 2020, I was locked down in Argentina throughout most of the COVID pandemia. Roadblocks were set up everywhere. No doctors were available. We were cut off for weeks at a time. It was actually one of the happiest times of my life. Again, by dumb luck, I was trapped on the ranch with plenty of fresh vegetables, plenty of fresh meat, and good red wine. Good books, too, and a guitar and sunshine. Not everyone was so fortunate. A neighbor was in bad shape. He had an open abdomen and desperately needed sophisticated medical attention, but the roads were closed. All he had was his family, trying to cope the best way they could. A local nurse visited occasionally, but she didn't even have clean bandages. We did what we could, and he survived, but just barely. And that's the way it works. You're okay if you're healthy and in the right place at the right time. But if you're not, it can be hell. And the worst part isn't the rising prices or even the shortages. Inflation isn't just a matter of higher prices. It infects everything. It corrupts everything. One day we heard on the news that a truck carrying cows to a slaughterhouse in Buenos Aires was attacked by a mob. They were so desperate, they slaughtered the cow right there in the middle of the street and cooked it over an open fire. In Argentina, inflation is running about 50% per year already, and it's destroying the economy and the society. Houses are half-built, roads are unpaved. A mason there earns $25 a day, if he's lucky, not $25 an hour, as in the U.S. You see people driving around in old Ford Falcons and living in houses with cement floors. Fewer than half of the people have jobs, and those are expected to carry the entire nation on their backs, even with inflation, shortages, and corruption running wild. And here's a news flash. It was reported in March of this year that only 43% of eligible Americans paid income taxes last year. We see the same process developing in America. In fact, based on my experience in Argentina and my reading of history, I'm convinced that the same sort of financial chaos that I've seen in Argentina is headed to America. It may already be here. First, there's the corruption. Fed governors resigned after it was revealed that they were actively trading the stock market while making policies that directly affected stock prices. The president's son makes sweetheart deals in foreign countries. He was getting $50,000 a month from a Ukrainian gas company, though he knows nothing about gas and doesn't speak a word of Ukrainian. Now the U.S. gives billions in aid to the Ukraine. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Big corporations get bailouts. 18 billionaires collected stimulus checks. Then there's the internal conflict. Some states are threatening to break away. A recent article in the Dallas Morning News asked, "Can Texas be its own nation?" Other states seem so out of touch, many people would like to see them go. The whole country seems to be coming apart at the seams. As for politics, whether it concerns murder trials, forced vaccinations, teaching critical race theory to children, or trillion-dollar boondoggles, Americans have never been so mad at each other. And of course, there's inflation itself. Prices in the U.S. are already going up at the fastest rate in 40 years. Yet the Biden team is spending $1 trillion more on infrastructure. It says it will help bring inflation under control. And last year, Congress passed a $1.5 trillion spending bill, which gave the IRS an extra $675 million. Then Biden proposed a $5.8 trillion budget with the largest tax increase in history. Our spending is out of control. This is on top of a deficit for 2021 of $2.7 trillion and $3.1 trillion for 2020. That's 13% of GDP, which is Banana Republic level. Argentina only has a deficit of about 8%. This breakdown in our money system is a big focus of my team. In fact, the first of 3 major reports we did this year is about money itself. It explains what is going on, how it affects the stock market, and the one simple move you can make now to avoid having your savings and retirement destroyed. If you sense a growing social and financial crisis in America, you're not wrong. But it goes deeper than what you see. It starts somewhere else, somewhere people aren't looking. Chapter 10. Who really rules America? This might surprise some people. You've probably never heard anyone say anything quite like it, but I'm the one who can say it. When a society goes a little mad, something remarkable happens. Almost everyone goes mad too, or shuts up. When the Nazis took over in Germany, for example, it was just a matter of months before almost every major newspaper, big company, the courts, the politicians, even the churches were on board. You couldn't find another point of view. Censorship, canceling, deplatforming are already happening in America too. So you wouldn't hear this from the Wall Street Journal, and certainly not from the Washington Post. They are firmly with the elite of our society, the American nomenclatura. They don't want you to hear this. And not because I'm forecasting inflation and a bear market. It's because I'm challenging the authority, the motives, and the competence of America's elite caste. And yes, you heard that right. I did say caste. They are nearly permanent members of the ruling class. Dwight Eisenhower warned about them in his farewell address in 1961. He called them the military-industrial complex and warned that they have unwarranted influence on America and have acquired a vast amount of misplaced power. He had added congressional to the military-industrial complex, but his advisors insisted that he remove it. They thought it would be bad for White House relations with Congress. Eisenhower was right then, and since then it's only gotten worse. And it's not just the military-industrial complex anymore. It's DC insiders, it's academics and Wall Street types at the Federal Reserve, it's celebrities from Hollywood, and it's the media, especially the mainstream media. You will find these deep state elites writing editorials for the New York Times, like Tom Friedman, who helped push the U.S. into the most disastrous war of its history, the War on Terror. He's still there and earning a reported $350,000 a year. No matter how wrong he is or how disastrous his recommendations, he's still there in the ruling caste. And this elite, this caste of people who've been feathering their own nest at our expense, has brought the U.S. into a debt trap with the $88 trillion I mentioned of public and private debt. And guess where that money went? Overwhelmingly, it went to the people who call the shots. America's real rulers, the elite establishment, the aristocracy, the nomenclatura themselves. That's why higher prices are almost guaranteed. And it's why this is so urgent. And watch out. Inflation comes down like an avalanche. You have to get out of the way before it's too late. It's tempting to dismiss today's corruption and disruptions as if they were a regular part of life. After 70 years, it's kind of par for the course in a place like Argentina. But it's new to America, and it spells big trouble. As I said, the trick is to be in the right place at the right time, with your investments, with yourself and your family. That's why one of our major research reports, a strategy report, is about finding the right place for your wealth in the coming crisis. We look back through history, over 700 years of it, to see what worked in the past. And we looked at what's worked on Wall Street and for some of America's most independent financial thinkers. It's a report every investor should read. If you want to understand what's happening in America and how to prepare your portfolio for it, this information you must have. Because the right place has just taken an historic shift. You need to understand it. You need to make a shift too. It's not difficult. We believe it comes down to three major things: money, energy, and politics. And by politics, I mean the politics of the Federal Reserve as well as the administration. And I don't even care whether you agree with me or not, but I wouldn't feel good about myself if I simply walked off stage and retired and failed to give you this last warning. And this warning is the most important one I've ever delivered. Why? Because the way things are going, it's soon going to be the end of the line for the stability, safety, and prosperity we thought we could count on. So this is about protecting everything you've been able to save and being able to live the rest of your life in relative calm and financial security. That's what I'm aiming for, and I bet you are too. I should also say that this is definitely not a message for everyone. Some people just don't want to hear it. Some people think my team and I are a bunch of broken record doom and gloomers. That's fine. If it's not for you, maybe it's not for you. It is a message for a small group, not a big one. That's why we chose to become involved with our new project. We have no distractions, nothing else to sell. Our only mission is to help you get through this great crisis as unscathed as possible. Wall Street won't tell you. They want you to keep buying their products. Washington won't tell you. They want you to keep voting for the same old politicians. And the press won't tell you either. They don't want to rock the boat. Reporters no longer question authority, they promote it. So you're probably wondering what our readers think of us and this service. It's less than 6 months old, but already it seems to have struck a chord with our readers. So I'll let our readers explain it for themselves. Here's what they're saying. Of course, not everyone is happy. Some people don't like hearing what we have to say, but that's okay. You can't please everyone and you shouldn't even try. All you can do is try to connect the dots and tell it like it is. That's all we do. You decide for yourself what to do with the research and the analysis we provide. Chapter 11. America, not what it used to be. Get ready for some big changes. Many of the things that we've taken for granted for most of our adult lives are coming to an end. We're used to store shelves that were full all the time. We're used to buying a house or selling one and getting a mortgage at a reasonable rate. We're used to rising prices, but at a moderate rate. Before this is over, I predict we're going to see clerks changing prices every week just to keep up with inflation. We're used to a standard of honesty and trust that was by no means perfect, but it was a lot better than in many third world countries. We're used to thinking we can trust our government, but not necessarily our politicians. We're used to thinking that they would never deliberately try to cheat us, and that when push comes to shove, they will do the right thing for us all. We're used to giving our opinions without being censored or deplatformed or pounded by mobs of self-righteous busybodies. That world, the world we knew and trusted, is coming to an end. It's going to be a rough passage, and we need a plan for getting to the other side. This will affect everyone, and it will affect everyone in ways that can be very difficult to avoid. It's been coming for a long time. I've had plenty of opportunity to watch the system evolve. I began my career in Washington 50 years ago, trying to stop waste in government. Back then, the government was far from perfect, but it worked more or less well for everyone. Now it works only for a few people. Today, the system is dysfunctional. The elite use the government to get what they want for themselves, and then they look down their noses at everybody else. And nobody is going to tell you about it. Remember when Walter Cronkite returned from Vietnam and told Americans that the war was unwinnable? In a matter of hours, the public turned against the war, and Lyndon Johnson bowed out of the 1968 presidential election. We trusted Cronkite. And we used to depend on the elite to make sure our newspapers print the truth. But that trust is gone. They're not going to tell you about the coming nightmare for the very simple reason, because they're paid not to. America's economic and financial system is controlled by a fairly small group of people: lawyers, lobbyists, members of Congress, the bureaucracy, the press, universities, Wall Street. Others either don't understand what's going on or they're in on it. And no, I'm not talking about some dark conspiracy. This is happening right out in the open. Everybody sees it, but very few people understand it. And those who do understand it have a keen interest in making sure you don't. So they tell us that the inflation is transitory, for example, or that it's caused by supply chain disruptions, or by greedy corporations, or by Vladimir Putin. Just last month, President Biden said America was, quote, enjoying enormous growth on the very same day the government announced that the economy was actually shrinking. As for inflation, the Biden administration even maintains that spending more money would help reduce inflation. Can you trust anything that comes from the media or the government? No, I don't think so. And thanks to so many lies and so much fuzzy thinking, now the whole system is bound to blow up, and it can't be stopped. In 1999, total debt in America was $25 trillion. By 2008, because of the housing bubble, it had more than doubled to $53 trillion. It was $74 trillion by the end of 2019 when the pandemic started. And now it's $88 trillion and going up. I'm talking about corporate, household, and government debt. The economy only has grown about 136% in the last 20 years, from $9 trillion to $22 trillion today. In other words, for every dollar of additional output, the economy added almost $5 in debt. But government debt has grown much more. It was $5.6 trillion at the beginning of 1999, just over 50% of GDP. It was $10 trillion by the end of 2006, thanks to Obama's Wall Street bailout. It's almost tripled since then, and it could go to $40 trillion by 2025. And what do we have to show for it? New bridges, airports, highways? Hardly. We have failed wars and a massive bar tab, and that tab is coming due. And as they say at closing time, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. That's why I'm convinced a great financial crisis is coming, maybe even imminent. We can't stay here, adding more and more debt like this. We already have more debt that we can pay, and we can't go home, back to normal. No, we can't do that. Normal interest rates would mean an enormous financial crash and depression. There's only one way out: inflation. And that means the dollar, our economy, and our way of life as we once knew it must die. And America too. And here's the thing, this isn't just some fellow ranting about GDP and CPI numbers. This is about your life. You go to buy a new car, for example. Talk about sticker shock. It won't cost you $30,000, it will cost you $300,000. You might have to decide to stick with the old jalopy for a bit longer. You get the bill for your child's tuition at college. It won't be $40,000, it will be $400,000. What can you do? The kid will have to go to a different school or get a job, and good luck with that. Oh, and if you're thinking about buying or selling a house, forget it. Nobody's going to be making fixed-rate mortgage loans, not when inflation is 50% and going higher. So make sure you're somewhere you want to be in the years ahead. It might be difficult to move. And it's going to be a big problem if you've got a mortgage to refinance. I know this is beginning to sound like classic doom and gloom. People have been crying wolf for a long, long time, and I'm one of them. I remember thinking back in 1971 when the U.S. went off the gold standard that no country with a pure paper currency had ever survived the temptation to print more money. I didn't think this one would either, and here we are 50 years later, and we're seeing that story playing itself out. And you know, Sometimes the wolf is real, and sometimes the wolf is at your door. I think this is one of those times. For our economy, for our country, for our way of life, and for our standard of living, the wolves of Washington and Wall Street have taken over. Prices are going up again at an alarming rate, and it's a whole new ball game. Now that inflation is headline news, the Federal Reserve can no longer pump more and more money into the economy and get away with it. People now know that it's going to cause a lot more inflation, and they won't like it. This is the critical difference, the crucial thing you have to understand. It's why this problem has reached a crisis point. Up until now, the Fed met every crisis with more stimulus, lower interest rates, and more money printing. And yes, the new money produced a sugar high each time. But it can't do that anymore. Now everyone knows that inflation is a threat. And the minute they see the Fed printing more and more money, trillions of it, they're going to panic. The system is already saturated with sugar. In other words, add more to it and it goes into a diabetic shock. Chapter 12, How Your Life is About to Change. When the next crisis begins, in a matter of hours, your life may change dramatically. Suddenly, everyone will go berserk. First, the bond market will crash, and I'm not just talking about junk bonds. They're going to be wiped out, of course, but treasury bonds will crash too, and they're the ballast of the whole world's economic ship. When they go down, the whole boat goes down with them. Pensions will be decimated. Insurance policies will get hammered. Corporate savings will be destroyed, and companies will be unable to borrow more. Overnight, mortgage rates will shoot up. As I write, they've already increased more than 2% since the summer of 2020. Earlier this year, they hit 5% for the first time since 2011. And that's nothing. As we saw at the beginning of this booklet, mortgage rates will have to go to 10% just to get back to normal. Secondly, consumer prices will begin to rise a lot faster. You see, there are two parts to inflation: the money itself and how fast it changes hands, or what they call velocity of money. Up until now, money velocity has been slow. People still expect inflation to stay low. They think the Fed will raise interest rates to contain it. They're more afraid of the Fed's higher rates than they are of inflation itself. But once the Fed lays its cards on the table, making it clear that it can't fight inflation, people are suddenly going to realize that prices are going a lot higher. Then, desperate to get rid of their dollars, trillions are going to change hands. That's when inflation takes on a whole new meaning. Already, Bloomberg is urging readers to follow the Argentines' example and spend their money as fast as possible. The velocity of money, in other words, is going to go up, and prices are going to go up faster too. And here's where I can help you. Everybody knows that the moment of truth is coming. Everybody knows that the Fed will have to decide, either protect the dollar and the real economy or protect Wall Street and the elite who control it. Either continue to inflate the system or bring the whole corrupt system to a halt. So far, the Fed has been failing miserably to preserve the value of the dollar. Did you know the dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve was invented in 1913? But it's been a slow loss of purchasing power. Nobody has gotten too excited about it. But now we're talking about much higher rates of inflation, and the Fed can't stop it. Most people expect it to muddle through somehow. It always does. Many expect the Fed to raise interest rates, bringing the bubble economy to a halt. But it won't. The Fed is trapped. It has no way out. It's why I'm going on record with my warning today. The Fed faces a simple choice: keep printing money and bring runaway inflation, or stop printing money and crash the stock market and the economy now. And I need to warn you, too, of the political implications. You can lie about a war in Afghanistan for 20 years, who's going to know? But prices? Consumers see them every day. So there's no hiding from this one, no getting away, no ducking or pretending. Every time people go to the gas station or to the food store, they're going to realize that something's not right. And each time they'll be tempted to throw a grenade. Inflation is always bad news for a democratic government. Voters don't necessarily understand the process, but they feel ripped off, and they don't like it. Typically, they want to throw the bums out. But the bums have their ways of staying in power. And when the whole elite establishment is on their side, the press, the universities, the military, and both political parties, it's hard to make any real change. That's why there are only two possible outcomes. Either the government brings inflation under control, or the kind of checks and balances, light touch democracy that we've had since the days of James Madison blows up. Sadly, I think I know which way it will go. The elite will choose to continue printing money. Inflation will get much, much worse. The dollar will die, and America will never be the same. Chapter 13. How to turn $100 into $33 million. With our small team, our work is very focused. First, we try to figure out deep down what's really going on. Then we connect these big picture insights with specific investments. Confluence is what we call it. The great economist Friedrich von Hayek had a similar concept in mind. He called it conjuncture theory. So you can see why we decided to go with confluence. It's easier to say. Let me give you an example, which also explains how I came to work with Tom Dyson, the investment director of our group. Back in 2018, I picked up on some work done by other analysts in the past. It was a simple ratio between two assets, the Dow Jones and the price of an ounce of gold. Those aren't just any ordinary assets, by the way. The Dow Jones represents the cream of the crop, businesses that create value for customers and shareholders. Buying these companies at the right price and just holding on to them has proven to be one of the simplest and best investment strategies of all time. Gold, on the other hand, is not an investment at all. If you'll remember in the Bible, Jesus tells the parable about an investment manager who was punished for just holding gold. He didn't want to take any risks, so he buried it in the ground. But gold is not a way to make money. It's just a way of making sure you don't lose money. It preserves wealth. Also from the Bible, we discover that there's a time for everything. There's a time to make money and a time not to lose it. What I discovered in my research was that by looking at the ratio between gold and stocks over time, you could create an easy-to-follow system of when to buy and sell stocks and when to buy and sell gold. All it took was analyzing the ratio and then making the right move at the right time. Either stocks were going up or they were going down. All you had to know was this primary trend of the market. Then it was simple. You were either in or out. Around this time, I actually got an email from Tom Dyson, an old colleague I had worked with in London back in 2003. Tom looked at the Dow Gold ratio I'd written about. He did his own research. And then Tom was convinced, as I was, that this single indicator was the best way to make major market decisions, timing decisions, when to buy and when to sell. And Tom took it one step further. He analyzed the ratio going back 110 years to the establishment of the Federal Reserve System, and he refined the system so that an original investment of just $100 back then would be worth $33 million today, using the simple signals that he developed. I'm not going into any detail here. Tom's done that in a 30-page report that he's written for new subscribers to Bonner Private Research. It's called the Gold Report. It was one of the very first of our research reports that we published, and it's probably the most important piece of research to your future investment returns of anything we've published yet. It's not complicated. In fact, when Tom back-tested the system, it revealed that you would only have to make 6 moves over the entire 110-year history to generate $33 million return. That's it, 6 trades, one every 18 years. Of course, none of us invest or are lucky to live over 110 years. Instead, we have 10 years, maybe 30 years. And here's the point. No matter what period you're looking at, you need to know what the primary trend is. Then you can't fight it. You have to adapt to it. In Tom's gold report, he shows when the current bear market began. And as long as it goes on, most of his money will be sitting in gold. The rest is carefully invested in a few surprisingly profitable counter-trend stocks. Then, when the crisis is over, and when the primary trend is favorable for stocks again, he'll go back into the stock market with the bulk of his money. As you'll see, this is a defensive system designed to prevent a big loss, but it's also extremely profitable over time. Tom explains the whole system in his gold report. In just a moment, I'm going to have another longtime colleague, Dan Denning, show you what other research reports and analysis are available. We've already built an impressive library of reports, interviews, and analysis to help you get through the coming crisis, and there's more to come. This new service of ours is not like anything you've ever seen before. I don't know if it's better or worse. I can only guarantee that it's different. It's not a tip sheet or a stock picking system or a complex options or trading strategy. It's an old-fashioned financial research and analysis system. It's connecting the dots. It's the confluence between big ideas and the real world of investing. It's the forecast, strategies, and long-term plans that come from all the work we do. It's ideas and philosophy, also specific ways to make money. It's putting you in a group of people, many of whom live on their investments, and putting their money to work. Here's what some of our newest readers are saying about it. I'll let you read them too as I continue talking. And I forgot to mention something you may have noticed in the comments above. One of our first decisions at Bonner Private Research was to eliminate all third-party advertising. We did that because we wanted to keep everything between us simple and clear. We're dealing with a big threat, the biggest financial threat any of us have ever faced. We can't afford to get distracted. We can't afford mixed messages. We can't afford to take chances. There's only one major problem we're trying to help you solve: how to survive and prosper in the middle of a huge financial, social, and political mess. It doesn't mean we'll always get it right, or that you'll always agree with me. Lately, I've rattled a few cages with my observations on the Russo-Ukrainian war. And of course, I'm not always right. In fact, I hope I'm wrong about this. I wish there were some way to neutralize $88 trillion worth of debt without triggering an enormous economic catastrophe, but I'm afraid there's not. So let me tell you about some of the other reports we've prepared for you. I've already mentioned the gold report. It's the most important piece of research we've published so far. It's one of 3 key reports we make available to all new readers. Another important one tells you where you should have your money now. It's our strategy report prepared by my colleague, Dan Denning. In it, he breaks down the case for or against bonds, stocks, real estate, gold, and cash. He looks at interest rates, the dollar, and some of the long-term implications in the stock market. The strategy report guides our investment decisions. From there, our investment director, Tom Dyson, covers specific investment ideas in his research. The strategy report is reviewed and revised on a quarterly basis or as needed. The third of our 3 main research reports is our trade of the decade. For longtime readers of my work, you'll know that I made the call to buy gold and sell stocks in 2001. It was designed to be one simple move you could make for 10 years to beat the market. You can see how that did below. I know you can make a chart say anything you want just by changing the starting point, changing the scale, but this chart doesn't lie. Gold absolutely did trounce stocks in my first trade of the decade. By the way, this is another reason the gold report is so important. The better you understand the relationship between gold and stocks, the more you know when to buy stocks and when to sell them, or in this case, when to buy gold and hold it. My second trade of the decade was to buy Japanese stocks and sell Japanese bonds. It was a little trickier than the first. The first part worked well, the second part, well, not so well. Little did we know in 2010 how active central banks would be in support of government bond markets. We know now, but we still came out ahead, up 58%. Our current trade of the decade is also doing very well. Dan lays out the case for it in 24 pages. And since the trade first went live in January of 2021, it's already up more than 100%, and for reasons that will be obvious when you read the report. In fact, the trade has done so well, so fast, many new readers are wondering if they already missed the boat. Well, they haven't. Remember, we take a big picture view, and this is a long trade. This trade has many more years to play out. It's just getting started. Chapter 14, when the real crisis hits. There are going to be bumps in the road over the next few years. Nothing goes up in a straight line or down in a straight line. There will be surprises, and there's no guarantee that our approach will work as well in the future as it has in the past. And we're likely to see a lot more nails and grenades tossed into the road by politicians. Remember, people are not going to like what lies ahead. They're not going to like inflation. They're already grumbling, and it's barely started. They'll want to throw the bums out, but the bums have their tricks. One way or another, they're going to make your money less valuable, and this won't be the first time. In 1779, Congress devalued the revolutionary dollar, the continental, 38 to 1. In 1863, the devaluation of the Confederate dollar, the grayback, began after Appomattox. It went down to 0. In 1935, FDR cut the dollar by 60%. It took $20 US to buy an ounce of gold before Roosevelt's devaluation. After it, it took 35. In 1971, Nixon closed the gold window and ended the convertibility of US dollars into gold coins. The last two were done with the stroke of the pen. No act of Congress was necessary, no vote, no approval required. So let us imagine the next emergency. Will it be any different? We saw what happened in the emergency of the COVID-19. Businesses shut down, whole industries put on life support, trillions of dollars doled out in unrepayable loans, unemployment boosters, and other forms of deficit spending. In the space of 15 months, the Fed printed more new money than it had in the first 100 years of its existence. And the new money was created with no vote, no act of Congress, no debate. So what will happen next time? Let's take a guess. The next crisis, and it could be triggered by nothing more than a correction in the stock market, will be handled just as the last ones were, from the Great Depression to World War II to the bailout of Wall Street and the COVID crisis, with more spending, lower interest rates, and more money printing. Well, what's the problem with that? After World War II, the country boomed. But World War II came to an end. In the space of a few years, the budget dropped by $72 billion, a 75% cut, then went into surplus. The debt as a percentage of GDP fell for the next 35 years. There's no chance of that today. No peace, no victory parade, no end to the money printing. The debt's too big. Even without a crisis, U.S. debt grows by more than $1 trillion per year, and it can't be managed down by cutting expenses or raising taxes. Neither Republicans nor Democrats will go for it, and no politician will be elected who proposes it. Instead, the new inflation will have to run its course. From today's 8.5%, it may dip for a while, but then it's off to the races, 10%, 20% and beyond. Nervous savers will try to dump the dollar for land, for gold, for art, for anything that will protect them from losing money. This spending will increase the velocity of the currency, and the other big component of inflation will come into play. That's when we'll see prices rise at 50% per year. Soon you'll pay $50 for gasoline, assuming there is any. You'll go to refinance your home and feel lucky to get a $15,000 a month mortgage payment. You'll look on the shelf of the supermarket. You won't find your favorite cereal, so you'll have to make do with something else. Bananas will be $20 a pound. There won't be any blueberries. The suppliers simply will have gone out of business. All episodes of hyperinflation develop and end the same way. People lose faith in the currency. The government introduces a new one. The dollar will die. But the new currency won't be an imitation of the dollar. It will be a new kind of currency, a digital dollar. Wait now, what are the real odds of inflation running out of control as I've described? 50%? More or less? I don't know. Only a fool is sure he knows what's coming. And what are the real odds that the dollar will be replaced by a purely digital currency? Again, I don't know. But listen to this. There are 90 different countries around the world studying how to implement a new digital money system, and for some very good reasons. It would give the government total control over your money and what you do with it. Did you see what happened to the Canadian truckers when they defied the government? Their money was cut off. And with a digital currency account with the U.S. Treasury or the Fed, with a few keystrokes, the government could stop any activity it wanted. Do you support the wrong cause? Do you buy the wrong food or drive the wrong car? All of a sudden, the government could get you to do whatever it wanted. Of course, the Chinese are way ahead of this. They've developed a social credit score, which can be linked to all of your online activity. Do you visit the wrong websites? Do you have the wrong opinions? Your social credit score can then be linked to your bank accounts and used to determine what mortgage rate you pay, or stop you from traveling, or from buying the wrong thing or supporting the wrong candidate. And look what happened to Russians in the U.S. imposed sanctions. Most Russians had done nothing wrong at all. They just happened to be Russian. But since they were Russian, their accounts were blocked, and they were cut off from their own money. No charges filed, no judge, no jury. And we're talking about ordinary Russians as well as oligarchs. Many of these people had not lived in Russia for years. The new digital money would give the federal government immense new powers. It would also eliminate taxation as we know it. No more need to file a return. The government could simply compute your taxes itself and take the money directly out of your account. Tax evasion would be a thing of the past. Whatever happens with the old dollar, I believe this new dollar is coming. It's just too attractive for politicians to resist. It would allow them to settle up on decades of overspending with a few electronic entries. Poof, the debt, $30 trillion of national debt gone. They could start spending afresh. Make no mistake, your dollars, as you have known them, will soon be history. Either they will be inflated away or replaced by a digital currency, or most likely both. Then, what will your retirement look like? How about your savings account? I know that's a lot to take in, but we've laid it out for you in an extra report I'd like to send you. It's called the Dollar Report, and it's free to all new subscribers. Chapter 15, What to Do Now. This crisis will determine how most of us live out the rest of our lives. And to survive and prosper, it comes down to three questions. First, where do you live? You want to be in a place that's friendly and safe for you and your family. If you lived in St. Petersburg, Russia, for example, in 1917, when the Bolsheviks took over, It didn't matter how rich you were or how nice you were. You didn't have to look for trouble. It would find you. Two members of our group, Dan Denning and Tom Dyson, traveled all over the U.S. looking for the best place to live through a crisis. Montana, Idaho, Arkansas, Oklahoma. They put their findings in a special report. I'll tell you how to get it in a minute. Second, how do you protect your wealth? Keeping what you have is by far the biggest investment challenge you face in the next crisis. But how? With bonds, gold? How about stocks? One of my associates is probably one of the best long-term value investors in the country. That's Chris Mayer. Over a 10-year period, he even beat Warren Buffett. And now he advises us on our long-term stock recommendations. And Tom Dyson, as I mentioned, is our investment director. If you're not familiar with his research or its value, here are some of the highlights. Take Danaos Corporation, for example. It's a shipping company, recommended by Tom. It rose from $3.50 in July 2020 to $93 in mid-March 2022. Or Petros Resources, that's a Canadian gas company. It rose from 10 cents to over $2.43 in the same period. Or Oroco, a copper miner. Tom bought it for his own account for 16 cents a share in 2020. He sold for $2.50 a share a year later. And look at coal. I wrote about it years ago when everybody said it was a dying industry. Nobody wanted coal. Dirty, heavy, old industry. It makes you think of England's dark, satanic mills in the 19th century. But where do you turn when you run out of oil and gas and uranium? Peabody coal has quietly jumped by 125% since the beginning of this year. That's after going up 750% the year before. Taking it from its low in 2021, it rose 1,890%. And then there's Arch Resources, up 359% since October 2020. Consol Energy, up 923% in the last 18 months. You get the idea. Our main goal is to protect your wealth. But when the world goes a little mad, there are also some very exciting investment gains to be had by betting against madness. But let's back up. This is not about us. This is about you. Whatever happens, I'll be all right. Thanks. I should have retired many years ago. I don't need the money. I'm not running for office, and I'm too old to care what people think of me. No, this is not about me. It's about people who are counting on their stocks and bonds and counting on the governments and depending on the whole system to hold together so that they can enjoy a comfortable, safe retirement. If I'm right, those people are in trouble, much bigger trouble than they realize. Their wealth, and not just that, the money they live on and their comfortable way of life could be vaporized. Trouble has been coming down the pike for a long time, but now it's coming home for us. And I believe if you take some of our steps we've recommended, you can prepare for the coming storm and protect your family and your wealth. You do have choices. They may not be easy ones, and you may not like them, but there are a lot of ideas out there on how to prepare for what's coming. The trick is to find out which financial ideas work best in crises such as this. History is a very useful teacher in this regard, and thankfully, so is my own career in financial publishing. Chapter 16, Avoid the Big Loss. One of the early newsletter gurus I studied years ago was a guy named Richard Russell. And one of the things I learned from him was one of the most important bits of advice I ever got. When you're young, you can afford to take a chance. You can afford a loss from time to time. You take chances, you win some, you lose some, and you have time to learn and to recover. But as you get older, the calculation shifts. Take a big loss and you may never get over it. It's been fairly smooth sailing for us baby boomers. If we got into the housing escalator in the 1970s, We did all right. And if we got onto the stock market escalator in the 1980s or 90s, we did even better. But all those gains are now in danger. All of them. Pensions, insurance payouts, capital gains in the stock market, even the value of our own homes. When the mortgage rates go back to 10%, where they were as recently as 1990, most people won't be able to buy a house. House prices will collapse. That too is the kind of big loss that you want to avoid. But people still say, oh, I'm not worried. Every time my investments have gone down, I just sit tight, they go back up. Well, yes, they do go back up, but not necessarily in your lifetime. After the boom of the 1960s, it took 2 decades for stocks to recover, adjusted for inflation. Even after the NASDAQ crash in 2000, investors waited 17 years to get back to normal again. The Japanese stock market crashed in 1990. They're still waiting for it to come back. And if I'm right, more people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s are soon going to take a big loss. Then they have to change their retirement plans, downsize, downscale, go down market. It's a lifestyle adjustment, but it will be very painful for many people. I've seen it up close. When the Argentine peso collapsed in the early 2000s, many older people had to pick through the trash on the streets of Buenos Aires just to get enough to eat. And here's the point. It doesn't have to be that way for you. Remember, there are some people who will benefit from the coming catastrophe. I can't guarantee that you'll be one of them, but I can help make sure you go into it with your eyes wide open. So at least you'll have an opportunity to dodge the bullet. And here's the deal. We have just one service at one price. In it, we give you everything we've got, big picture and allocation strategy, trades, analysis, everything. No expensive back ends, no hidden fees, no hidden agenda, no divided loyalties or conflicts of interest, and no promises except that we'll do our best to protect your wealth and give you trades that could double, triple, or quadruple your money as the crisis develops. But I'll let our publisher, Dan, summarize our offer for you.
Hi, my name's Dan Denning, and I'm the editor-in-chief here at Bonner Private Research. Now, I've been working with Bill Bonner for over 25 years now, and in that time, we've experienced several booms and busts, lots of highs and lots of lows. We saw the dot-com crash, the 2008 recession, and in the last 2 years, this crazy global pandemic, which has turned everything upside down. But I want to be clear that what Bill is talking about today isn't just another market downturn. In The Day America Dies, which is the audio book that you just listened to, Bill's warning you of nothing less than the greatest financial crisis in American history. So the question is right now, what can you do to prepare for it and get through it unscathed? And I think that's where the team at Bonner Private Research can help. So let me explain how. First of all, every day I work with Bill Bonner, Tom Dyson, and our friend Joel Bowman to provide investment research and insights that will help you survive and prosper during this great financial crisis. Now, the four of us worked together 20 years ago to help investors like you survive the dot-com bust and the housing bubble. Today, in 2022, we're back together to help you face what we think is an even bigger problem. That's saving your money and your retirement from an even greater crisis, a systemic crisis, if you like. Now, we already have thousands of grateful subscribers to our new project. One reader even said he thinks we're producing hedge fund quality research at a ridiculous price, which is really flattering. I'll get to that price in a moment, but let me quickly take you through what you'll get if you sign up to become a member of Bonner Private Research today. First, let's start with our library of 4 major research reports. Now, these are in-depth investigations into the biggest issues facing the market, the economy, and your money. They cover stocks, bonds, commodities, gold, the dollar itself, and of course, energy. The first is a 21-page strategy report. Now, this is the big picture. It's all about finding the right place to put your wealth during this crisis. We'll show you how to split your money between stocks, bonds, commodities, gold, cash, and real estate, even some wine and art. Now, being in the right asset class at the right time or out of a dangerous asset class goes a long way to keeping your money and your retirement as safe as possible, which is our goal. Second is the gold report. Now, this is a 34-page report that investment director Tom Dyson put together. It shows you how to use the Dow gold ratio to know when to buy and sell stocks and when to buy and sell gold. We believe this single indicator is the best way to make major market timing decisions. And really, Tom does a brilliant job of walking you through exactly how this system works. The third report is called the Trade of the Decade. So every 10 years, Bill recommends one simple move that you can make to beat the market. His first one was in 2000, and it was to sell stocks and buy gold. It was a big winner. Gold was one of the top performing asset classes of the next decade. Stocks didn't do well. The current trade of the decade is energy. Now, that one went live January 2021, and already it's up over 100%. And I think for reasons you'll see in the report, we expect that to continue. Fourth and final is the dollar report. So with inflation running at a 40-year high, the value of your savings, the value of the US dollar itself, has never been a more urgent question for Americans. So in this report, you'll learn whether the dollar will remain the world's reserve currency or will it be replaced? And if so, by what? Or is a digital dollar, a central bank digital currency that replaces cash, closer than you think? All of these questions and more are answered in the dollar report. So those are the 4 big research reports that we've prepared for new readers like yourself. And I think that alone would be worth the price of a subscription. But you'll get even more if you sign up today. So let me quickly review what else new members receive to Bonner Private Research. Well, they get a monthly investment report from Tom Dyson. Tom has an incredible 20-year track record calling some of the biggest investment opportunities, months or even years before they become mainstream. And 2022 has been no different. His recommendations are up over 52% on average year to date. And each month you'll get an 8 to 12 page report with Tom's best investment ideas. So whatever it is, I guarantee it will be useful, thought-provoking, and communicated in that personable, readable style that's made Tom famous in the investment world. You'll also get weekly tactical and strategic updates. So on Wednesdays, Tom will provide you with updates on the stocks he's covering. He may announce coverage on new stocks or investment ideas. And from time to time, he'll answer the questions that you send in via email. Again, we want a conversation, not a monologue. So then on Fridays, I step back and look at the bigger picture to see if anything has happened that needs us to reconsider our investment strategy. The macroeconomic and geopolitical analysis of markets is something I've been doing for nearly 25 years. So from interest rates to oil prices, from war to midterm elections, there are lots of other dots to connect as we prepare for this day where America may die. So you're going to get over 100 of these direct, to-the-point updates over the course of your 1-year subscription. You'll also get access to our private members-only comments and discussions. Now, our readers are some of the best informed, most experienced investors we've ever met. And when we started Bonner Private Research, we wanted to create more of a dialogue with readers like you, a community where you could comment, share your ideas, and discuss our research or the world with each other. Another benefit I mentioned before is that you're going to get a free copy of Bill Bonner's last book. That book was called Win, Win, or Lose, A Modest Theory of Civilization. It's the book that Bill thinks is the best work that he's done. In this book, he shows where our leading economists, politicians, and policymakers have gotten it all wrong, and why it's been such a disaster for ordinary American savers and investors. More importantly, he shows what our country needs to do right now to get back on the path to peace, prosperity, and personal liberty. It's a book I think you're going to want to share with your children and grandchildren at this important juncture in American history. By the way, you'll also get 4 State of the Universe addresses. These are fireside chats that Bill does 4 times a year to look at the big picture. He tries to connect the important dots and answer questions from readers like you if possible. It's a wide-ranging discussion, and if you prefer to read these, by the way, you'll be glad to know that all the videos we record are transcribed and posted online within 48 hours of recording. So when you sign up below, you'll get clear instructions on how to access everything I just mentioned, plus everything we've published since the beginning of our project in late 2021. And more importantly, you'll get guaranteed access to everything we will publish for the next year. So that's 12 monthly reports, close to 100 weekly updates from Tom and me, all of our private video briefings, and any in-depth in-depth research reports that we publish in addition to what we already have. So by now you may be wondering how much all of this will cost. Very good question. So given all the research you'll get when you sign up, what would you expect to pay? Now, before we launched Bonner Private Research, you would have had to pay close to $1,700 per year just to get the work that only Tom and I are doing. That's what subscribers paid last year before we joined forces with Bill, his inner circle, and formed Bonner Private Research. And by the way, what is it worth to get Bill Bonner's 40 years of experience and market wisdom delivered straight into your inbox every day, plus his private quarterly video fireside chats? And remember, this is the only place you can get Bill's work right now. So to recap, you'll get monthly and weekly investment research from Tom Dyson and myself. You'll get Bill Bonner's daily and quarterly updates. You'll get our 4 main research reports: the strategy report, the gold report, the trade of the decade, and the dollar report. Plus, you'll get private video briefings from members of Bill's inner circle from time to time. And remember, you get a free electronic copy of Bill's last book, Win, Win, or Lose, A Modest Theory of Civilization. And again, you'll get all future major research reports that we publish, and we've got quite a few in mind. So after 25 years in financial publishing, having personally worked with hundreds of analysts and dozens of research services, I think it's fair to say that everything I've described is worth at least $3,000 a year. That's given all the research and analysis we're providing. But I'm happy to say we're not charging anything near that. An annual membership to Bonner Private Research is just $395. So if you subscribe for 1 year, that comes out to about $1.08 a day. And really, when you put it that way, that's not much to pay at all for the quality and the quantity of the research and insights that you'll get with your subscription. Which, by the way, reminds me of one final point that may matter to some people more than others, but it's an important point to us. Bill mentioned it before, but there's no advertising for other products or services when you subscribe to Bonner Private Research. We are not trying to sell you anything else, either from ourselves or a third party. Your subscription fee is our sole source of income. So the price that you pay for your subscription allows us to stay small, personal, private, and ad-free. So we work only for you. And really, if the work that I've described to you doesn't sound valuable by now, or interesting or useful, that's fine. Don't subscribe. But if it does sound like what you're looking for, well, at this point, there's really only one thing left to do. Just click the button below and subscribe now. It only takes a few minutes, and once you're in, you'll gain access to everything I described above. So, thank you very much for your time. We look forward to welcoming you to Bonner Private Research soon. Have a great day.
In closing, it's impossible to predict exactly how the future will develop, but it's not so hard to guess how the deciders will react to the trends that are already underway. And it's fairly clear that they will react to the next emergency just as they reacted to the last one, with more printing press money and more debt. What will be the next emergency? I don't know. It could be a stock crash, a cold winter, a new variant of the COVID. It could be almost anything. But one thing is sure, it will be something. In this little booklet, I've focused on the most immediate threat: inflation. It's coming because it's the only way for the people who control the system to keep the money coming their way. And when the next crisis comes, they won't turn away from their inflationary policies. Instead, they'll double down, insisting that we need to spend more money to protect the economy, or to create jobs, or to move away from fossil fuels. There are always emergencies, and every one of them will be a reason not to stop printing money. And soon, prices will be soaring. There'll be shortages of key commodities. Mobs will be in the streets. It will be too late to think straight, too late to take precautions, and too late to protect yourself or your money. The government will try to bribe the voters with more money. It will win some time, and it will win over some voters. But handing out more printing press money will just make the situation worse. Our elites will use the printing press and their new digital dollars as a weapon, and they'll use it against anyone who challenges their authority or their power. COVID, inequality, racism, global warming, these are mostly just smokescreens. The really important thing is that the system that put the elite on top must be preserved at all cost. Take away the printing press, the deficits, and the artificial low interest rates, and suddenly the economy gets crushed, and the elite lose some $30 to $50 trillion. The top 1%, including Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, alone have gained $10 million per household from the stock market bottom in 2020 through to the end of 2021. The average 1% household now has wealth of more than $34 million. They've got a lot to lose, in other words, and they'll do all they can to prevent losing it, which is why, under Biden, just as under Trump, Obama, Bush, and Clinton, the debt ceiling will be raised again and again until it finally goes through the roof. Debt will increase, the rich will get richer, the poor will become more poor and more desperate. Prices will rise, shortages will appear, and the system will fall apart. Yes, we can imagine how disappointed James Madison might feel. But he and others gathered in Philadelphia that summer were trying to do something that had never been done before. They were trying to create a government so perfectly balanced that a parasitic, corrupt elite could never take it over. No group had ever achieved that. No democracy ever survived an episode of runaway inflation, and no paper currency ever survived a corrupt government. The temptation to print more money is just too strong. So what we're seeing now is just the fatal flaw that Madison was up against. He couldn't stop it, and we certainly can't either. All we can do is to watch, to analyze the big picture, and to look for ways to protect ourselves. And we look at the little picture too, looking for profit opportunities. Right or wrong, we give you all we've got. And don't worry, people say we should be charging $5,000 for this service or more, but we're not even close. Not even 10% of that. And I hope to see you soon on our short list of subscribers. Thank you.